Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Safari Pedal Show. I'm your host, Abby. If this is your first time here, welcome to the Crazy Wild Safari Podcast thing bandwagon. It's great to have you. I am super stoked for today's episode because Bryn Bliska is going to be on the show. She does so many cool things. Among them, she is a keyboardist, producer, composer, sound designer, and musical director. I am super looking forward to diving into her journey and hearing about how it's evolved for her, and also hearing about her role as a musical director and how the whole world of live shows works. I don't really know much about it. There's not much more that I can add to this intro. So guys, please give a very warm Safari welcome to Bryn Bliska. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much for hopping on. Really appreciate your time. So before we dive in to all of the good stuff, let's start with who you are, what you do, and we'll take it from there.
Totally. So yeah, my name is Bryn Bliska. I sort of describe myself as a musician, composer, and producer. I also musically direct. So right now I've been on the road with Maggie for a while, play keys and a bit of guitar and vocals in that band, and I co-music direct for her. So it sort of touches all the things that I like to do in music, which is playing live, producing, thinking big picture, some of the technical nitty-gritty sound design, programming, that kind of thing.
I'd love to go back a little bit into your audio journey. Since you do so many things, what came first in the chain for you, and how did it get you to where you are?
Totally. That's a great question. So I would say I was always a musician first. I played piano since I was really young, and sort of in elementary school. So maybe when I was 11 or 12, I became really interested in recording, making demos. So the earliest version of this was literally a tape recorder I had. I was cleaning out my closet not too long ago and I found some old tapes. It was actually really, really amazing. And then a bit later, my parents got me an early M box. So I had this really janky but effective Pro Tools rig where I could just record with that. Made a lot of demos in middle school and was sort of just exploring audio from a really creative standpoint. So I was just I want to record these ideas or make these little demos, add whatever it was at the time. I had I think it was an old Casio that had a lot of drum beats built in. So I would just be recording different parts and layering them, and still sort of playing keys through this whole journey, playing in bands. I went to a very sort of arts-forward high school, and we had an amazing teacher there who basically encouraged us to just play in bands, and we would have a music class where the whole point of the class was just to put on a show at the end of the semester. But along the way, we'd often record. There was sort of a studio setup in our music classroom. So I feel I got a little bit more into, producing, not deep engineering, but basic signal flow, basic sort of audio principles, compression, EQ, reverb, effects, just making things sound slightly better, but without going too deep, because it was still pretty music and arranging forward and performance forward as opposed to deep engineering. And then in college, I sort of took a right and a left turn at the same time, because in college I actually studied neuroscience, but I was still doing a lot of music in school, both performing and playing mostly jazz at that point. And partway through my college journey, I was introduced to a professor, this amazing guy named Jim Moses, who his whole thing was essentially the audio engineering and production division at my college. And I took sort of one intro to studio class with him that was really just all about audio engineering and production, and that really opened my mind to everything in a really detailed sense. So that's kind of where I feel my brain exploded a little bit, and I realized how much more there was out there. Again, I think for me it's always been coming at the angle of achieving specific creative goals, or exploring creatively, but I do definitely have a very math engineering brain. So I think that was a really key light bulb moment for me, was connecting those two parts, which I previously, I feel more connected in the music theory sense. But yeah, with him, I got to just get a lot more hands-on recording experience, learn how to use, at the time it was really Logic and Pro Tools. And then a couple years down the line, I sort of got hooked on Ableton, and not completely abandoned the other two, but I'm much more Ableton heavy these days. So yeah, I feel coming out of college, I sort of knew that there was a lot more that I wanted to learn on the audio side. So I kept studying. I took some Berklee online classes in mixing and mastering. And also when I moved to New York after school, and I just spent more time in studios and just kind of shadowing people. I was doing a lot of session work, but I would always be in the control room being like, what's that? What are you doing? Like asking friends questions and that sort of thing. So I feel like I'm sort of, my engineering background is sort of hacked together. Like I have a little bit of formal training, but a lot of it's just been sort of what I've absorbed along the way. And it's very functional and just kind of like what I've wanted to pick up. And there's a lot of things that I know are not my strength that I would call other people to do. Recording drums, like I could hack it together, and I picked up enough from friends along the way, but like I would never put myself in the room as like a proper recording engineer in that respect. So I feel like I'm more like on the production side of audio, but I can hang, in the basic sense as well.
You got the best of both worlds, as Hannah Montana would say.
There we go. Hell yeah.
Heck yeah. At what point did you get into touring and going on the road, and how was that transition for you? Because that's like a whole other world, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think when I moved to New York and I was like, I'm not going to gig to make money, I sort of put performance like on a back burner, and I was more like, oh, I want to be a session person, I want to compose, I really want to be in the studio. And I was pretty much doing that for most of the time up until the pandemic, with the exception that like a few years into my time in New York, I did miss gigging. I miss playing out, and I miss meeting people through live music. So I sort of started playing with various like local bands and friends, and actually started playing in like an all-female funk band in New York that sort of led me to my first big touring gig, because two of the girls in the band were playing with Karol G when she sort of started building her live show. And coming out of the pandemic, her musical director, they had been looking for a keyboardist because it was her and a DJ, then her and a DJ and a guitarist, my friend Seuss, who's freaking amazing. Then they added a drummer, they added a different keyboard player, but it wasn't quite the right fit. So eventually they called me literally in 2020, and they were like, oh, like, we're doing the Latin Grammys and like the Macy's Day Parade. Do you want to like jump in? But ironically, it was actually a good time to start because with Karol, I was able to sort of do these like one-offs, get to know the team and vice versa before we like dove into touring, which didn't happen until 2021. So it honestly came about pretty randomly because I think I knew that I didn't have it in me to do like DIY van touring. And so I was like, okay, that sounds like a little crazy. I'm going to sort of stick to studio life, composing, sound design, because I do love being at home and like in my creative zone. But then I just sort of like got thrown into the world at a high level where I was like, oh, like this is really fun. And I do, at the end of the day, I love performing. So it kind of worked out in a good way for me. And now I just sort of try to balance a little bit of everything. I've been touring pretty heavily for the last 3-4 years. But I do like the music direction stuff because it kind of I feel like I get to utilize some of those other skills that I would normally use in the studio while I'm on the road. And then I'm also just like cramming in a bunch of other stuff when I'm either on the road or off the road. So I sort of try to keep it all going to some extent now.
That's awesome. I'm really curious. I really don't know much about kind of the structure of how it works with like a musical director and putting on a live performance. So since you do that now, let's say for Maggie stuff, like how does that work in terms of bringing all those aspects you spoke about, your playing, composing, like how does that kind of smush it together, you can say?
Totally. Yeah. So I think, every like artist MD relationship is very different. And with Maggie, it's really special because she's had another musical director for many, many years, basically over her whole career. And when I joined the band a couple years ago, I was sort of supposed to just come in and sub as a keyboardist, and then like go back to my other gig. But it was sort of a really good fit, and they offered to basically make me co-musical director with him, this guy Brian Kesley, who's amazing. And I would say basically the underline of the job is just we're sort of responsible for making the show a musical success. So that's like helping Maggie realize her visions creatively, hiring the band, interfacing with the production and the audio team to make sure they have what they need. So like, for instance, we're getting ready for a new arena tour that's starting in a couple weeks. And it's like, okay, we're building a new show intro. We're building transitions between songs. We're, talking to the creative director about how the lighting and video are going to fit together and the staging are going to fit together with what's happening musically. We're like providing actual assets to the lighting people so they can program the show. And, for instance, like about a year and a half ago, we decided to move all the guitar stuff over to Kemper, so digital emulation, just for sort of like road stability. But that's really fun because essentially what happens, and this is true of my keyboards as well, is like we have most of the songs are on a click. And so from that playback session, we're able to send MIDI information to either the guitar rigs or the keyboard rig that's changing patches between sections. So you could do like, you know, massive reverb swell that like hard cuts at the end of the chorus or something like that. Like you can just program in a lot of sound design that's harder to achieve when you're like one human being with only two hands. Or like for me as a keyboardist, it really helps because I'm able to just focus on like playing and singing and like not changing patches like 18 times in a song. So I feel like we're very focused on using the computer as like an extension of creativity, and like adding abilities that we just like cannot physically do. Because like I've had other gigs where I'm changing patches as I'm playing, which is really fun, but you do feel like an octopus because you're sort of like, sometimes I'm using a foot pedal to change keyboard sounds as I'm playing and singing. So that was a very long-winded answer, but it's just like there's so many different things that kind of get touched on when you're just like, oh wow, like we actually need to put on a show. There's a lot that goes into it, and it's super fun. Also like Maggie's team I really enjoy because it's super integrated. So for instance, like because Brian and I, the two MDs, we play in the band, we work really closely with Bob, the front of house engineer, who's also been with Maggie forever. So he has like almost as much of a say on things like sound design and other choices because we're asking him, how is this working out front? Like we're getting show recordings from him and talking like, is this tone hitting in the way we want it to? So it's it's a great team effort to sort of like make all the details come to life. And I feel like we're also all very obsessed with the details, but it's kind of like, if you just make all these small incremental moves, you can really make like a big impact in the end. So that's kind of our whole vibe.
Dude, that's so fascinating. This is my first time like hearing about this. So I'm kind of like
yeah, it's amazing when you think about kind of like how nuts you can go with everything. Cause you're like, okay, in this case now, there's 7 people on stage, including Maggie. They all have a rig of some kind, you know, that's where you have to transduce the signal. So it's like, you know, maybe it's DIs, maybe it's the percussionist. He's always like tweaking his mic setup. Like everyone sort of, and that's just like from a sound standpoint. And then there's like the arranging of the songs, there's the set list, then you add the visual stuff. Like there's a lot. So it's really fun.
It's like my brain can't comprehend on like what's the scale of like this operation is. It's so fascinating, but it sounds like a blast with the MIDI.
Totally, exactly. It's really fun to just nerd out and kind of add all these fun details. And ultimately, like the goal is to create something where no one's thinking about any of these details, and it's just like an impactful emotional experience that like gives, you know, Maggie and her fans this like special thing. But I feel like we all enjoy sort of like the minutia that goes into like making that picture what it is.
Who doesn't love a good reverb swell? Come on, guys.
There you go. Exactly. If you don't know you love it, you still love it, you know?
Yeah, and I'm sure also choosing the type of reverb is a blast.
Oh, man. Yeah. It's deep in it.
I'm sure. And in terms of like all those details, is this all run like through Ableton, Pro Tools?
So our playback sessions are in Ableton, exactly. And it's basically all one master session at the end of the day. And we have a special, like, a person whose job is also to sort of help us manage that while we're playing. Like, he's firing things, making sure, like, it switches to the B computer if the A computer fails. He's also kind of the MIDI king, and he's my keyboard tech, Josh. So, shout out, Josh.
Hey, Josh, what's up? That's awesome. This show in general, like, one of the main themes of the podcast is starting out, being up and coming, and all of that fun jazz. Do you have any pieces of advice maybe it can be producers, engineers, general audio people, musicians who are curious about kind of the space that you're in now, for, I guess, advice for them if they kind of want to go in that direction as well?
Totally, yeah. So I feel like I have some general advice and then maybe some specific advice, but I think like the two things that have really stuck with me kind of through all the different phases of my career and like the different hats that I wear. The first one is just like really to be yourself and to sort of figure out what it is that you're excited about and kind of just run with that. And that could be like, maybe you become a specialist in something really specific. Maybe you're sort of a generalist, but you have like a few things that you always kind of get called for. That's sort of what I feel can help make a career, is like having whatever diversity of things that you like to do, to keep yourself inspired and like having fun, but having a couple things that like you're super known for that like your phone will always ring about. So for me, it's like kind of no matter what, I think hopefully I'll always get called for like my skills as a keyboard player and like keys, playing, sound design, that sort of thing. Like I think people know that that's a real strength of mine and that's something that they can rely on me for. And then also that I bring sort of all these other things to the table. Figuring out what your identity is, which is really just based on like what excites you and what you think you're good at. And sort of just like running after that, even if it feels like niche or like hard to describe. I think sometimes I look at my career and I'm like, oh my gosh, wow, like the things that I do are so specific and like telling people about them, it's crazy. Like, but I love them and they are a job. And the chances are like there's probably a role or multiple roles that will fit, whatever particular like cocktail of things that a creative person likes to do. So that's a big one. And then the other one, I think people say this all the time, but I just think it is very true, is like most roles in audio or music are very collaborative by nature. You're like a part of some kind of team. And I think like just approaching that with like your interpersonal sort of like vibe in mind is super key, especially if you're touring. Like you're hanging out with people all the freaking time. You're working maybe like 15% of that time. So I think like being a good hang in whatever sense, again, that's like you can be sober, you can be someone who likes to party. Like there's no way to be like a good person on tour or in a work environment, but just being authentically you, but being very mindful of the fact that like it's a team sport. It's very collaborative. Not only because I think almost every gig that you end up doing is collaborative in some way, but also like the only way that I've ever gotten basically any kind of job in music is through some sort of like friend or networking thing. So just, friend of friend, it's usually through a personal connection. I know in some more like traditional roles, that's not as true. And you could actually like apply for a job, and like interview, in which case you would still have to like, crush the interview, etc. But I think like your social capital and your social skills are super key. And it's also just like what makes jobs fun a lot of the time. Because again, like even if you're in a studio, a lot of the time you're just like shooting the shit. You're making sure like the artist is comfortable or the producer, depending on your role. And having that human aspect in mind is super key. Because at the end of the day, like hopefully we're focusing on like making art and like making something that's fun or compelling in some way. So I think like as much as I love the nerd side and I'm obviously like deeply, deeply nerdy, I think I try to focus on like, like we're people creating some sort of creative experience that's rooted in like either like ideas or moving ideas forward or like conveying something emotionally. So I think just keeping that sort of interpersonal aspect as like, it's sort of to me on par with your technical or like creative skills. Like those two things are sort of equal players in what makes someone good for a job, or I think something that will like help you find work and keep going.
Yeah, wow. Dude, first of all, thank you for dropping super, super valuable advice. I appreciate it. To sum up everything that we spoke about, I always love to ask our guests to either drop, it can be a piece of advice or anything that you want to say to the Safari Pedals world. So is there anything else that you'd like to drop to the people?
Yeah, I think the other thing I would add is just be like, don't be afraid to ask questions and try to put yourself like in rooms or with friends that just know things you don't know. I feel like most of the like cool engineering and production hacks are things that, I was either like with a friend in the studio, just be like, what is that? Like, teach me your ways. I feel like curiosity is power, and I find I'm always chasing my curiosity. So whatever it is that I'm excited to learn more about, I sort of like follow that rabbit hole for a while and get into it. And I think for me, I often find that kind of learning, it's interesting because in school I was a really good like book learner and like I really like structure, but I also find like that face to face, or like even if it's over Zoom and like audio movers, like kind of getting someone's take on something, I find to be really helpful. And obviously that's super big on online on YouTube as well. I have a harder time I feel like digesting information that's just kind of like coming from a person that I can't talk to. I feel like I feel like I either want to like read about it in a manual or like be able to talk. And if I can't talk, then I'm like, oh, but you're right there, but you're not. But there's so much great stuff online as well. But yeah, I feel like chasing your curiosity, that's something that I'm always just like kind of trying to stoke as like a fire. I'm always like paying attention to what I'm curious about and like following that, you know, when I have time.
I love that. Curiosity is power is a great line. I think you should put it on a t-shirt. You can start like a whole brand. Sick. Absolutely.
Love that.
I really, 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 really appreciate you hopping on and sharing advice, wisdom, and insights. And I had such a blast hearing about your journey. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.